Hello, my name is Jamar Turner, and I'm a chaplain at the Ohio State Wexner Medical Center. I'm actually a resident, and I'm also in the DMin program at the United Theological Seminary of Twin Cities. And today I want to present a didactic to you on womanist listening practices. Um, we'll begin with a definition of spiritual listening or the spiritual dimensions of listening from Kari Jackson. It says, through listening, we have the ability to help the speaker come to a deeper understanding of what is truly in his heart or her mind, awaiting discovery. By listening, we can help others get clarity about their issues, which enables them to better express what they might not have had words for before. We have the capacity to bring another person's soul into life by listening. By listening, we have the capacity to help others experience the presence and power of the divine within. And that's in Kari Jackson's book, Listening to Hear, on page 2. And then on page 3, she adds this: when we really make the time to so listen and hear others, we send the message to them that they are important, loved, and valued by us. We foster within the speaker a sense of being valued for who she is. We help create a condition of safety in which the speaker can risk opening to us her most prized possessions, her soul. I lift this up not knowing if Kari Jackson identifies as a womanist scholar, but she is a Black woman and certainly fits the philosophy of spiritual listening in which I'll be working from today. But a few things I wanted to highlight in terms of her definition is one, she points out that listening can help you come into a deeper understanding, of what is truly in the hearts and minds of those we listen. That many times there are things underneath the surface that are waiting to be discovered, but only through listening can we provoke those things to come to surface. She then highlights that we can get clarity about issues through listening. I've done the exercise several times where I've said something, but then I wrote something, and when I wrote it, my heart's intention came out more deeper than when I was speaking it. And I think sometimes when you listen to people, you can hear that heart's intent alongside the words, which will then allow you to raise reflective questions for clarity about issues that people are struggling with beneath the surface. But then she says it brings another person's soul into life. Again, she's speaking to unearthing something deeper in the communication exchange that wouldn't be brought to life had that person not had the safety and the space to be able to reveal just small tidbits of it. And through listening, empathetic listening specifically, we can hear those small gems that people, or crumbs that people are dropping for us. Lastly, she says you can experience the presence and power of the divine within. So essentially, this spiritual practice of listening, this spiritual listening, highlights the divinity within us. Sometimes our clearest answers are deep within, and it just needs, and we just need an interaction with someone who will be able to lift those divine intents, divine instructions that we cannot access alone. I strongly believe in the third voice that emerges when two people get together, and I believe that's the divine voice. She further continues to talk about the mutuality of spiritual listening and how two people can benefit from spiritual listening. She says, when we really make the time to soul listen and hear others, we send the message to them that they are important, loved, and valued by us. We help create a condition of safety in which the speaker can take the risk of opening to us her most prized possession, her soul. In opening her soul to the soul listener, she experiences divine presence, which is God. When divine presence is felt within the conversation, here's the mutual benefit of spiritual listening. Both the speaker and the listener are transformed. I think what she's speaking to is that third voice I was talking about. When we, the scripture says, where two or three are gathered, I'll be in the midst. And I think that happens when we soul listen to one another. A third voice appears, and that third voice is enriching to the conversation. It's almost like that old saying we say, there's your truth, my truth, and then the truth. That third voice is what that clarifying voice, that discerning voice. Another thing Kari Jackson talks about is lethal listening styles. I think she overdoes the aggressiveness or the violent nature of these listening styles. But this book was written 20 years ago, so it was written in 2003. But she does list some malpractices or poor practices of spiritual listening, and we'll just run through them really quickly. On this list is the analyst. This listening style focuses on identifying and assessing the patterns, strengths, and weaknesses of the life choices that other people make, received as critical and judgmental. Then she talks about the co-opter. The co-opter redirects conversation topics so as to focus attention on himself or herself, as if the subject matter or a subject matter that's more important to them. And this can go unnoticed. There's the drifter, and it's just as it sounds. The drifter drifts away for any number of reasons that may or may not be related to the person speaking. The interrupter, not listening well, interrupts others often. The interrogator asks rapid fire questions and makes patients or people feel under attack. The know-it-all may impede meaningful and satisfying interpersonal connections that create a sense of value and security in the listener. The pessimist has a long-lasting and toxic effects that stem from past hurt. So they're always pessimistic about everything that they hear. The over-explainer. After listening, they over-explain into paragraphs. They co-opt the conversation and the person who needs you to listen to him. The quick fixer. Premature assessments, premature help creates unsafe environments and thwarts the likelihood of a meaningful connection, because they're always working on fixing rather than listening. The self-protector. There's a such thing as healthy boundaries in relationships as listeners, but we can be so self-protecting that we become the focus of the conversation, which then kills and collapses the communication effort. So we can be so self-protecting that we're hidden from the conversation and our genuine self does not show up. And these are just 10 of the lethal listening styles that she raises. 10 common listening behaviors that accompany these styles. She says listening to one's own thoughts more than the person talking. I've certainly done this in patient encounters, trying to think about what tools I'm going to use as a chaplain. Ignoring emotions being expressed. Assuming you know what they will say before they say it. Focusing exclusively on words and missing nonverbal signs like tone, pitch, and body language. Focusing on nonverbal signals. Intertwining residual feelings from a previous encounter onto this current encounter, so projection. Associating feelings with prior situations unrelated to the current speaker, projecting feelings onto the speaker, assuming everyone expresses feelings the same way that I do, using one interpersonal language, intellectual or emotional, despite cues that this language is not working for them. I hope if you're taking notes that you were able to identify perhaps which lethal listening killers that you practice. I certainly have practiced a number of these in my experience as a chaplain. Just the drifter, the self protector, changing conversation. Certainly these are things that I've done before. But I want to transition now. Like, these are roadblocks to listening in general, but I want to transition to roadblocks to womanist listening. Um, there's this concept Dr. Chapman Lake talks about. It's cultural countertransference, and this is when in the clinic setting, most of our dialogue will be around hospital chaplaincy. In the clinic setting, the clinicians has a permanent and subconscious cultural position, value, and assumption about the person receiving care that informs their caregiving relationship. So, for example, if you assume somebody is a drug user and you view them through that lens, then that will inform how you help them. As even as a doctor, as a physician, it will inform how you help or do not help them based on your underlying assumptions. And these assumptions or cultural countertransferences, which actually speaks to a larger element, which is how has the culture translated a message about this person before you? And in what ways are you believing the culture versus listening to what's in front of you? And how is that impacting your care? This is a roadblock to womanist listening, because womanist listening seeks to interrupt unjust cultural countertransferences. Well, I guess I would say that all of the cultural countertransferences are unjust, because a lot of times, even if it's not a negative stereotype, it can disconnect you from the person in front of you. Just because it's true of a certain demographic, maybe black women or black men, statistically, doesn't mean that it's true about the person in front of you. So, an example of this is, someone might watch, a projection that might come from culture is that black women are ignorant or loud or emotional, or they're so strong. And sometimes this can impact the way that people care for them in the clinic. The other one is an ignorance of one's own social location. Dr. Chapman Lake again states that the womanist chaplain must pay attention to their own social location lest they contribute to the perpetuation of an oppressive system that limits the flourishing of African American women. And this can be done by people, the cultural countertransference. It sounds like something that happens culturally, can be internalized by African Americans. But I definitely can see how ignorance of my social location as a black man can impede my listening to black women. An example of this is, for example, if I just assume all black women are alike, I think this can happen from men who say, well, all black women are like my kid's mother, right? Or even a worse term, baby mama, which has a derogatory connotation. So if I view all black women through that lens, then that's going to color the way I treat all black women. I think the third, and this is certainly not an exhaustive list, but the third element of womanist listening roadblocks is unbelief, simply unbelief. The womanist chaplain can effectively call the African American woman's narrative into the world by listening and empowering her to give voice to her own story. Once she tells her story, the womanist chaplain must, above all, believe her. This is again from Dr. Chapman Lape, who does this work on the womanist chaplain, and she says that above all, we have to believe Black women. And I think that comes against a culture where Black women aren't believed. In terms of issues with pain and pain medication, you know, issues even of sexual assault and things like that. We see this in the culture now, where it takes 20, 30 women to come out in order for someone to believe that they've been mishandled. So their voice alone is not always valuable enough to speak about an oppression that is happening against them. They need a whole communal support before they're heard. Next, I want to submit to you some womanist values, just some womanist values that might shape your understanding or interactions with Black women, or at least a practice that is centered in the realities and lived experiences of Black women. Some womanist values is womanists subscribe to a global vision and a desire that all people would survive and thrive. So womanists are inclusive of the entire community. They believe in a global vision and a desire that all people would survive and thrive. Womanists attend to and centralize issues of race and culture while still holding on to the aims of creating communities that build bridges across racial lines. So womanists are not exclusive, but they certainly are putting their issues on the forefront, or the issues of Black women and their families on the forefront, and certainly advocating for this marginalized group, while at the same time not minimizing the importance of connection and the survival and thriving of other people. Womanists and Miharista psychologies focus on emotional healing from a psycho-spiritual perspective. So essentially what this means, they understand spirit and spirituality are womanist coping mechanisms against oppression and vehicles of transformation, which is why the womanist listening practices are certainly important to a chaplain, because we are the spiritual care experts. There's some information, there's some knowledge, some things that we should know there that about chaplaincy, particularly from a womanist perspective, and three things that we should just know at the outset is that there is no American system, including the healthcare system, that is free from systematic injustice. We have to own that up front as we think system, as we become chaplains who listen with a systems thinking. And we have to own that up front, that there is no American system, including the healthcare system, that is free from systemic injustice. African American women thrive in relationship, against whatever the culture translate about. You see reality TV, and usually they're Black women arguing and fighting like they never get along with each other. No, Black women thrive in relationship. Black women are deeply spiritual, if not religious, and thus they thrive on a spiritual, compassionate, cultural care. And these are all thoughts coming from Dr. Jessica Chapman Lape's concept of the womanist chaplain. So now let us turn to an approach. Now that we've laid some groundwork on womanist thinking and a knowledge about the system and context of the hospital as it pertains to Black women, how do we approach? I think this approach that I want to lift today is embracing a care activism. It tends to and cares for the marginalized. It's an active activism through caring. Caring activism not only seeks to prevent future violations, but also provides care, provision, and healing for those who have already been wounded. And this is a quote from from womanist and heuristic psychologies. Secondarily, we're embracing a care activism first, and then secondarily, we create safe space for women of color to tell their stories and tell the truth about their oppression. Thirdly, we assist in co creating a new story that is empowering, authentic, and rewarding. So, this is our approach. We're embracing a care activism. We're creating safe space for women of color to tell their stories, to tell the truth about their oppression, to assist in co creating a new story that is empowering, authentic, and rewarding. Certainly, we could say more about this approach, but these are just the three I want to focus on today. How then do we create a safe therapeutic space for Black women? And once we've done it for Black women, we've done it for everyone. Um, we assume a posture of empathy, freeing patients to open up and explore their defense mechanisms. We allow Black women to experience the chaplain as affirming and understanding, and we recognize their humanity. Um, in this book, Midwifing, a Therapeutic Model, it says that Black women must be listened to and understood. And I think we talked about spiritual listening, but we need to go ahead and extend listening also to being understood. The author of this book says the goal of therapy, therefore, is not to be right, but to listen and practice understanding, creating a space for the thick experience of Black women to be heard. So, creating a space for the thick experience of Black women to be heard. Approach with the patient with a historical understanding that reflects their historical understanding, that reflects their diverse and cultural history and background. So we have to approach them with a historical understanding of their culture and background. Listening, understanding are important to women who have been unheard, misrepresented, invisible in relationship to others as well as self. Creating space allows them to value their feelings, engage their pain, and share her oppressive and negative experience, thus authorizing her to become empowered through the telling of her story. It enables Black women to become empowered and liberated in order to deconstruct negative identifications and develop a healthy core self and relationship with the community. So what? Why do we bring all this up? We must give the role of listener as experts. We must give up the role of listener as an expert and become a learner. We have to learn Black women's narratives. We have to listen to Black women's narratives and understand. And that takes away from, if we go into listening to Black women as an expert, then we won't necessarily reach understanding, because we'll make projections on them. We'll impose our thoughts about them onto them. Notice as much nuance as possible and help the person magnify their story, making it larger, clearer, and more available to the teller. Again, we have to be curious about the woman in front of us that is speaking to us and their specific story and experience. Listening for the contradictory, the unpleasant, the negative, not censoring the details or the difficult details of the story, but accepting them without fear. Black women are often at the bottom of the ladder, specifically Black LGBTQ members of our society. And this means that a lot of their narratives will include unpleasant details about our society, about ourselves. And we have to have the courage to face these fears in the stories of these women. Womanist care communications. This is something taken from Womanist care, and how we talk to Black women. First, not always verbal, and does not always include a trained professional. Sometimes Black women just thrive among sister friends. It utilizes effective listening skills to listen Black women into life. Affirmation is a womanist care principle. Must validate and affirm the stories and places of African American women. Confrontation can happen between and among women, but also must include the confrontation of systems for the goal of bridge building. Accountability in ways that affirm potential and call towards integrity. Healing, helping Black women to overcome. So, as with that said, I want to explain a listening approach that comes from an old book by Thomas Gordon. It's a model of active listening, and it begins with the we'll contextualize it for the African American woman. So here is the African American woman, and here is the encoding process, and here's the code. Here's the decoding process, and here is the chaplain. So essentially, this is the patient, and this is what they're saying to us. And this is the process of us decoding what they're saying and then filtering it right back to them. So essentially, if a patient says, "This hospital is trying to kill me," then we can encode that as, okay, it sounds like you're afraid. And then, no, we actually decode that as, it sounds like you're afraid. And then they'll tell you, yes, I'm fearful because I'm in this hospital all alone and my family member can't get to me. So then the chaplain runs that back to them. Oh, you must feel helpless or powerless. Now, I use that as a quick example, but I bring this up to say that in a culturally compassionate, active listening style, it would happen around here in the decoding process. And again, these are principles from Dr. Jessica Chapman Lape, who talks about a culturally compassionate assessment. So essentially, she advocates that during the decoding process, we should have a cultural awareness of Black women's experience. We should deep listen to them and come up with a culturally compassionate assessment as we interpret their lived experience. How do we do that? We do that by listening with a knowledge of systemic injustice. So when they say, "Oh, this hospital is trying to kill me," it's good to have a knowledge of how health inequity works, fears associated with being Black and alone, and a history of racist science. But then the next step is to have a culturally compassionate assessment, interpretation of their lived experience. So you can say, it sounds like you're feeling really powerless. It sounds like you're feeling all alone. And it refuses, thirdly, to relegate Black women to victims, but assist them in discerning personal strategies for resilience. Black women have coped well, and they have developed resilient strategies that have lifted our community as a whole. And they have these resilient strategies. So it's not that they haven't overcome oppression. So if we come alongside them, we need to be sure not to put them into a victim status or to assume they are victims. Now, they may have been victimized, but we don't assume that they're victims. So something you can say is, yes. So something they might say is, yes, I'm all alone. My grandmother died in this hospital and my family can't be here with me. I'm sure this was something that came up during COVID-19, you know. And what they're doing is they're acknowledging the system structure that has killed Black people in the past, but also connecting that to a death that was close to them and the presence of being Black and alone in the hospital. But you have to have a cultural awareness and cultural knowledge in order to listen to this deeply. Finally, we honor and facilitate resilience back to Black women by honoring spiritual expressions as a form of coping. So one thing you could say back to them is, you must feel all alone. I hear you saying you might feel more comfortable if you had someone here you trusted. So again, we're taking what is said and the way it's encoded, then we're decoding it with a cultural awareness and feeding it back to the patient to see if that's where they're at, see if we're understanding them correctly, and opening ourselves up for correction if we're wrong. You know, maybe I heard that wrong, but this is what I'm hearing you say. With that said, at this juncture, I think we should, if I were teaching a group, I would break out into groups and we would do some active listening role play. I have several listening activities that we will discuss in the next slide or in the next video, but I just wanted to lift up these principles of womanist active listening and spiritual support, and I thank you for your time.